Over the years, I feel like I've gotten the impression that people are getting increasingly lonelier and lonelier. At first, the vibe came from headlines of articles and studies and reports about how Americans nowadays claiming the amount of friends they have is more likely to be 2 or 3 instead of 5+ or something, which used to be more common in the 20th century. Then I started hearing about this male loneliness epidemic and how it's more likely for women to have friends than men. And there's a ton of drivel surrounding that particular topic. The one I find particularly inane stemming from the manosphere cranking out factory-made socially repugnant incels who claim that women are the problem for not monolithically adhering to traditionally submissive and disempowered dynamics. But I'm not even talking about romantic relationships here, because I want to focus on the whole loneliness part at the face value of literally just people out here being sad because they feel alone. Specifically, how it's manifesting in online gaming discourse. Now, I don't even know how to begin to look up this particular aspect of the loneliness discussion, because my assumptions are that gamers don't actually differ that much from non-gamers when it comes to friend count and the quality of their friendships for most people. So I'd imagine that these two groups would have similar ratios for this were statistics, the mode people with either 2 or 3 friends, whichever is most common. But the vibe I get is that gamers seemingly have way more extreme outliers, like the people with dozens of friends or absolutely no friends. Because there's people whose no-lifing equates to their life actually existing in-game, maintaining massive networks of friends and MMOs and actually keeping close touch. Sometimes even ending up getting married in real life because of games like WoW and Destiny. And then there's hikikomori types whose only connection to people comes from interacting with the after images of people in the form of art, aka staying inside all day playing games or reading/watching media. I don't know. I've always had this perspective that I don't remember if I came up with it or read it somewhere, that unless someone actually goes out to a cabin in the middle of nowhere without ever consuming media, then they're not truly alone because they're still interacting with other humans, even if it's in the form of art. The humanity they engage with just happens to be calcified and lacking the dynamics of interpersonal human interaction. Wait. What's funny is that, now that I think about it, MMOs actually have a ton of both extreme ends of friend-having gamer here. Because there's guys who raid and socialize with clans and guilds or whatever, but also dudes who just solo grind dailies and weeklies and whatever other endless checklists religiously. Anyways, in the big 2026, we've been seeing banger after banger Friendslop games, which I feel started with Lethal Company, but then it's been Content Warning, Repo, Peak, and a ridiculous amount of others that aren't as well known. And in an era with game budgets and production schedules ballooning out of control, it's a nice reminder that sometimes some simple pure fun still comes about from these hilariously jank games that are hastily made and aren't the product of hundreds of people over 6 years. Friendslop really gives credence to the notion that anything is fun with friends, because that's a common criticism towards people who defend games with mediocre receptions that happen to have a multiplayer component attached. But then Friendslop kind of takes that dismissive gripe to its logical extreme, because if anything is fun with friends, then okay, why not make games that, sure, if you want to be overly critical about them, aren't the most well-made when it comes to fidelity, features, balance, overall scope, etc. But then since none of that matters due to the it's fun with friends buff, all the devs gotta do is nail the most basic foundations for a game to play with friends, and also manage to deliver some of the most fun and memorable moments of gaming regardless. I feel like this hits harder today because past decades, when big budget games were much faster at coming out, we weren't exactly starved for new multiplayer experiences to jump into in an era where everything had to have multiplayer to sell more units, since everyone in a group has to get their own copy. But nowadays, when big releases are at least $70 MSRP with games as a service and microtransaction model is tacked on top of probably being poorly optimized, these Friendslops are both a breath of fresh air, but also harken back to why unks love gaming back when high-fidelity, massively bloated Battle Pass-type games weren't the norm. Which is funny because while Friendslops probably remind the unks of good old times playing custom games on Halo Forge or Gmod servers, the young nephew slop enjoyers are having a grand old time already doing this type of gaming in Roblox. This video absolutely doesn't focus on dumb kids these days, because I highly doubt they are the specific type of online presence I'm going to be complaining about here. Specifically, the deluge of comments complaining about lack of solo modes in fundamentally multiplayer games and even being toxic towards multiplayer enjoyers. Because my understanding is that a lot of Roblox players aren't actually playing a ton of games outside of Roblox and might unironically be too brain-rotted for heavily involved feature and undated gaming experiences. That, or they don't got more powerful gaming hardware to even run today's demanding games. Both of which people are legitimately getting priced out of. Mobile, tablet, tablet and low-end laptop gaming is a completely different ecosystem than consoles and gaming PCs, after all. Now, I'm talking about loud outcries whenever Elden Ring Night Rain type games come out and either exclude or have tacked on solo modes in a game that was intended to be played multiplayer. Like, I remember when Night Rain first released and I was looking around online for tips and whatever other gameplay related things I was interested in at the time, yet there were so many videos and comments and whatnot where people were lambasting the game over not being solo friendly. Pretty sure it got review bombed too until they added in more accommodations for solo players, like extra self-revive, since the game is built around your teammates being able to revive you. And it does make sense that Night Rain gets more solo demanding attention like that because it's a spin-off of FromSoft, where they are well known for their difficult adventures, and the expected way to go about them is soloing everything and only summoning when stuck on a particularly hard encounter. Like, if you scour discussions for Friendslops in regard to solos, sure, you get threads asking if, say, Lethal Company is good as a solo experience, and there's differing opinions where some people say that it's not bad solo and they enjoy the challenge versus others saying, nah, this is definitely a game that's made to be played with friends. But then the comments that say it's meant to be played with friends don't get absolutely ratioed by a wave of solos. And that makes sense, right? I'm pretty sure even the most milquetoast bot-like person without their own opinions would even jump someone complaining about a Friendslop not having a true dedicated solo mode. Like it's in the name, you'd look like the most preposterous clown for hurling vitriol at Friendslops for neglecting solo. But then anytime you get bigger with the budget, because I wouldn't call games like Outlast Trials and Darktide Friendslops, depending on the game, you get varying degrees of people asking for a solo mode, because sometimes the game has it and it's just not as good in comparison to its regular multiplayer gameplay. And other times it's missing entirely and you have to play with friends or randoms. With those situations, the comments vibes are completely different, and it's more likely some people show up being like, it's not made for solos, this game sucks, and somehow that being an acceptable thing to do. And that dynamic is pretty much at the heart of what I wanted to convey in this video. Games are getting expensive to make, and so there has to be some way for solo players to engage with the bigger titles, which can unfortunately result in devs watering down mechanics in an effort to make playing solo feasible, even if unideal, purely because of a financial necessity to get as many players as possible, which includes the sizable and seemingly growing population of solo players. Meanwhile, the only games that can truly just go all in on multiplayer-focused gameplay without drawing solo ire are Friendslops, thanks to how endearing the naming is perceived. So now we're in this golden age of Friendslops where indie devs are making fresh takes to the genre non-stop that really make use of proc-chat and engaging mechanics with teammates. Like, I feel like you'd never see an enemy akin to the Lethal Company Coilhead, which works like a Weeping Angel or SCP-173, in a bigger budget release because it's an enemy that must be dealt with using coordination. This isn't something where it's feasible to solo as long as you don't get hit, like a Left 4 Dead clone, where I'd describe their usage of multiplayer as essentially just being extra lives and increased DPS. Because with Coilheads, they always need to be looked at in a game where you've got to deal with platforming, multiple other enemies, including one you're supposed to look at briefly, doors, etc. Clearly, you're going to have to be able to look at other things in the game if you want to get anything done, so you got to ask someone to juggle holding gaze. These types of mechanics are simple yet incredibly novel for a group of friends to engage with. And that's usually what's at the core of any good Friendslop, where there's some sort of gimmick that require active involvement from multiple people. I say usually because there's games like Peak, which is fundamentally just a game about climbing, which doesn't need friends to engage with the game's systems, as more people are helpful resource and info-wise, but they aren't how you do the core gameplay of climbing. But then there's games like Repo, where the gimmick is physics-based item grabbing, so sometimes things are actually too heavy and you need multiple people to hold a thing. Now, I want you to imagine how you would have to design these things to be solo-friendly without losing part of what makes that mechanic engaging in the first place. You really can't without making them fundamentally behave differently. Like with Repo, if you could just easily lift everything yourself to be soloable, you lose the gameplay that simulates when you and a buddy are coordinating moving furniture around while being beset by wackily spooky creatures. This presents a dilemma for the developers because it immediately restricts a lot of possibilities for more coordination-heavy mechanics, as anything that's solo-friendly has to fundamentally be, well, soloable, meaning there can't ever be mechanics such as simultaneous coordinated actions or exclusive tools utilized by one player that another can't have at that moment. What this means is that demands for a solo mode in a multiplayer-oriented game is essentially just asking for a different game, which needs a ton of work. And that really doesn't help with our contemporary half-decade dev cycles. And while this is conjecture on my part, I have a feeling that this plays a not small part in why there's suddenly so much publisher money being thrown at extraction shooters as of late. Because in developing big-budget games race to the lowest lowest common denominator in order to justify their costs. The hope is that this is a more sandboxy genre that can incorporate both PvE and PvE elements to draw in the widest possible audience, while having a dev cycle that isn't incredibly painful for the devs having to design a bunch of separate PvE and PvP content. It's a lot of work to make an entire PvE level with its imagined exploratory possibilities and unique encounters and enemies, then have to do that multiple times because of the expectation of multiple levels, versus just making all-encompassing maps that have opportunities for both PvP and PvE in them all in one sandbox that doesn't have to work differently for separate modes. All the while still adhering to what I described before, where any encounter has to be theoretically possible to solo mechanics-wise, even if in practice the combat difficulty is balanced around multiple people. And because there's a sizable solo audience of gamers, it does cause weird pitfalls to pop up in conversations regarding multiplayer. More specifically, when discussing multiplayer mechanics and how involved they are teamwork-wise. Because I've had conversations with people where when I describe like a Destiny raid to them and ask if they have recommendations, they'll suggest something like Space Marine 2. I then went and beat that game's campaign with friends on the hardest difficulty and a bunch of the additional post-campaign operations. And at no point when playing through the levels did I think this content had to be fundamentally played with a team. Like, everything could technically be done solo if you're insane enough. I get that teammates reviving each other is teamwork, and that it's easier to put in the correct symbols for an encounter if someone else is across the arena reading them out to you, but if I can go over there, read it myself, and then run back to input them, that is fundamentally still a solo encounter that is built to work more smoothly with a team. And thus, it is a more watered down, broadest audience accessible kind of multiplayer experience, like so many big budget games usually are. If that were a Destiny raid, I'd probably have to be actively doing something that enables my teammate to be able to read the symbols, thus preventing me from reading them myself. And most likely, there's a different teammate that's doing something that's enabling me to even enable the symbol reader in the first place. Space Marine 2 was a fun time though, but not in the way I was asking for. And now I realize I have to sometimes contend with people genuinely having no idea what I'm talking about when I say like a team-based activity that's like a raid or even like an escape room. And funny enough, even within Destiny there's solo players who exist that I hope are in the minority of solos that demand watered-down versions of raid content that fundamentally lose what makes them engaging in the first place and stand out from so many other multiplayer games, where the norm is everyone can kind of just do whatever while still contributing progress without demanding precise coordination. Because it still blows my mind thinking about that statistic where I think it was around the ballpark of only 10% of Destiny's player base have ever done a raid. Though I do wonder how much that percentage would increase if we could filter by varying degrees of active players. I get that they're hard to schedule since they're 6-player heavily team coordinated activities that are basically escape rooms where everything is trying to kill you, but there are unbelievably accommodating communities online to the point that if you're looking for a group, you can almost always get a raid going with randoms immediately as long as you're willing to make a post and meet some people. And this is so worthwhile to put in the effort because once you try a raid, it does the Dark Souls effect where it just ruins so many other games for you because they'll all just seem less engaging. Like, raids are clearly Destiny's best content, and I personally cannot fathom playing that game and never doing raids, even though that's the majority of its players. But back to Friendslops, because that tangent is just lamenting the sheer unfamiliarity that a solo-oriented player can present when self-reporting their completely different view, not knowing what it is they don't know. Friendslop games are like the closest thing you can get to turning raids into an accessible party game. So then with their incredibly cheap costs, the only barrier to entry is just having friends. And that kind of feels insane to say out loud, because that statement feels like so much of an assumed non-issue that I may as well have just said that the only barrier to eating food is taking a bite. But then, I know that this belies so much more to the loneliness issue, things that are vastly systemic and political that intersect with gaming businesses and people's livelihoods. I'm not trying to say solo players are bad people or anything, I'm more just disheartened by our state of affairs and want to point it out. Maybe encourage people to try and make friends, and perhaps more importantly, to put in the effort to retain them, even though it's all gotten weirder and harder to do so, especially in an age of post-internet COVID. I think people tend to underestimate the amount of time and effort it takes to maintain genuine friendships. So any societal forces that limit people's time and money is just outright an opposing force to everyone having friends. Like, for crying out loud, lobbyists are essentially just professional friend makers so that the Epsteinite class can procure favors from government officials. Even saying the only barrier to eating is taking a bite can be dismissive of underlying factors in a society where people are increasingly working longer hours for less pay while the costs of living keep going up. Like, I know there's a lot of solo dad gamers out there without time and energy necessities, and that's like a circumstance that makes me sad that there's forces at play that make raising a family so much more arduous than it has to be. That alone makes me not at all subscribe to the incel notion that declining birth rates is because of feminism or whatever. If anything, men are so much more likely to act like trash. I'm gonna solo annihilate my whole family. Because I'd attribute lack of kids to factors like how work wastes a ton of time, especially office inefficiencies. Like, oh my god, just do 4-day work week already, maybe even less days if we eliminate commuting with work from home, all while retaining same levels of pay, so parents have more time to spend with their kids, while also having the free time to do something like playing games so parents can stay sane. There's also lack of third spaces for kids to hang out or be daycared, and those are expensive as hell too. Actually, everything about raising a family is stupidly expensive. Point is, the prospect of having kids is unbelievably unappealing logistically, and I can see why some people don't want their life to become one of those dads in an office wasting away on Reddit demanding a solo mode for whatever big games are coming out nowadays. So yeah, lots of flavors of solo gamers, and also tons of societal forces pushing more and more people into that category. And boom, big studios have to be market cognizant, so they can't go all in on games fully dedicated to multiplayer that's anything other than the foundation where it's possible to solo queue up into an experience that everyone can run around doing whatever without needing to get deeply coordinated. It just causes these weird discrepancies in the perception around games that don't adhere to that solo-friendly groundwork, because there's pressure to include tacked-on solo modes to bolster sales, where those modes may or may not get the further support that they need. And what a ways from where gaming was last decade, where EA types were pushing for everything to be multiplayer and trying to uphold a narrative that single player was dead, even though this was just under the veneer of trying to sell more copies of games, since multiplayer games need everyone to have their own copy when online gaming was taking off. And split screen was slowly dying as fidelity was prioritized and hardware couldn't be running like 4 instances of top-of-the-line demanding graphics multiplayer games. Everyone has friends, so get them all to buy the multiplayer game, because with a single-player title, it can be passed around between them, or rented, or resold, meaning less revenue flowing to the publisher. But nowadays, when an RE9 comes out, it's expected that millions of people are going to individually buy it, maybe even throw out extra money for deluxe editions for things that would have just been included as unlockables in the past, and that its numbers absolutely will not flounder from friends sharing it or GameStop resales. Like, really hope my lived experience of rarely ever buying single-player games doesn't fade into obscurity, because, like, I grew up borrowing so many games from my Wii, PS3, and 4, and right now, my friends got a huge Steam family share going on. Because yeah, this isn't just a value proposition, it's furthering relationships. Like, we all love talking about the games we've played with each other, and it only further colors our experiences with these art pieces. It's so weird how multiplayer games are the takeoff point of all sorts of predatory business practices with, like daily login bonuses, grindy gameplay, pay-to-win microtransactions, and how I never thought that their ubiquitousness would hit single-player games like they have nowadays. Like, it made sense to me that multiplayer games would utilize those money-siphoning techniques better because a multiplayer setting could better prompt repeat plays and regular logins. But like, single-player games I saw as something to experience and be completed, and with a sense of finality also means a not endless cash flow, an antithesis of subscription. But I suppose the logical endpoint of all that was finding ways to throw those unscrupulous features into every game possible, including solos no longer as a begrudging concession, but rather eagerly, given their growing relevance. That's why we got so many games as a service titles as of late too, especially a PvE experience where people can grind towards power scaling tools while being barraged with microtransaction offers. A far less sociable dynamic than, say, a Fortnite lobby with a far more pronounced culture of showing off skins. I suppose for a bit there I was conflating soloing with single player games, because solo queuing, a soloable multiplayer game, isn't the same as single player. But despite all that, Friendslops also avoid all the nonsense that comes about with today's AAA games constantly trying to find more ways to extract from your bank account. So not only are these goofy little games so much more ethically pure by being cheap, they're a reminder that alternatives to so many gamers' gripes with the video game industry do in fact exist. If only people nowadays could offload some of the labor off the devs and doing so much work to make everything seamlessly soloable, and instead take the effort to send their friends a DM and organize a session themselves. Like, I forget where I heard this from, but I want to say that it's more likely for people without friends to have their media diets be more heavily leaning towards consuming heavily parasocial content like streamers playing Friendslops, and for gamers with a consistent play group to be more likely for their media diet pie chart to feature more content that's more like guides and reviews to better inform and color what they're going to be playing and what to try next. Which is yet another aspect of solos making discourse surrounding games weird, because I feel like there's so many more communities nowadays filled with, I don't want to say tourists, because that's not exactly what I'm getting at here, but like actual super fans of IPs who've never actually engaged with the source material themselves, because for them, it's all been through para-content. And in the case of Friendslops, people joining in discussions catered around multiplayer dynamics despite only getting their experiences parasocially. Knowing that that type of relation to media exists, it makes me now way more sus when I see takes criticizing Friendslops that are randomly more long-winded about something like a specific mechanic, since it gives off either solo or para-content consumer, because I feel like the people who play Friendslops with their friends are the types to not really comment that much online because they're hanging out with friends, and genuinely aren't thinking about something like game balance if it's sufficiently amusing enough to their group. Or if they do post, it's just funny clips and goofy images. Like, God, Friendslop community spaces are so unbelievably chill, and I have to imagine it's because they're populated by well-socialized people. And maybe that's the most annoying tangentially related aspect of people not having friends, is the obsession with Steam charts. I get that it's nice to know if there's a lot of people playing a game at any given moment so that you can find games better if you solo queue, but the way that has also completely shifted how people perceive the quality of a game's experience has been incredibly frustrating. Just because it's difficult to find a game lobby because of a low population doesn't mean it's a bad game. Like, yes, that negatively impacts a solo experience, but to then let that guide what are considered acceptable opinions about that game is so weirdly submissive. Like, unironically, a bunch of sheeps in lone wolf's clothing. It is so annoying because over my life, whenever I wanted to know how many people can be in a session for a multiplayer game, I'd always look up game name, player count. But for the last few years, that brings up Steam DB charts, which would only be prioritized if search engines determine that people are clicking on these and are actively looking for this. And as someone with friends, the Steam player count charts do not matter whatsoever. Like, if we wanted to friendslop some murky divers next weekend, then boom, we have a group. Just tell me how many of us can fit in that group, please. Like, back when Mecha Chameleon came out and I was looking up how many friends could I fit in there, I was shocked by this level of brain rot where the Arc Raider subreddit was showing up on front page Google search, which shook me to my core. Like, how are people this cooked, man? This has to be a psyop. What is happening here? So yeah, ultimately, I feel a tad bit peeved over this bizarre reality and all its peculiarities right now with all these really cool friend slops everywhere in an age of abject loneliness. And again, I really want to reiterate, not trying to hate on people who are solo gaming as a whole, because I can't tell if they're alone from societal outcomes or if they're like an Asmongold consumer and end up repulsing their peers while behaving insufferable online, and I want my sympathies to be well placed to avoid mental exhaustion, right? Like, there could be solos who are eagerly looking forward to playing the upcoming God of War Louve, however you pronounce that, and aren't acting like deranged misogynists online. I'm just more saddened that there's millions of people out there that don't get to experience the pure, unadulterated joy of whimsical friendslop adventure with their own crew of light. And I unironically think that we can systemically address doomer outlooks if lonely people are prescribed a month of unplugging from social media, and then spending all their free time friendslopping with chill dudes they enjoy spending time with, all paid time off. Like, this topic actually goes so deep and has its tendrils intersecting with so many media tropes of the 2020s. Like, I'm also convinced isekai as a genre is so popular because of all these lonely weebs out there, and they love being validated in these shows, and how that translates over to watching videos of dudes soloing Night Rain bosses and being him. MFs want to be Batman and Aura Farm as the dark brooding solo, but like, you need friends, you need Alfreds, bro. Please learn to seek the aura of a D&D party. This really does run that deep, like with adulation of figures like Let Me Solo Her and the aura loss he suffered when people watched him struggle against the Shadow of the Erdtree final boss. Yeah, turns out you need practice and or friends. You can't just be legendary first time John Solo. That's all from me. Drop a like if you enjoyed, and don't let the he's him smoke and mirrors fuel any solo validating delusions of self-worth. There's a whole bunch of wonderful people out there for us all to meet.